My name is Thomas Brackenrit. I am 34 years old, and for the past 8 years I have been married to a woman I thought was perfect. Sally Brackenrit is smart, beautiful, talented. She had spent her life in academia and was now writing her dissertation on Virgil, the great Roman poet whose works are still studied in universities today. For Sally, it wasn't just a job, it was her raison d'etre. But now her pride would be the cause of her downfall. A week ago, I found out that Sally was cheating on me with Donald, a colleague of hers. This man was helping her with her academic work, and now they were making more than just academic plans together. I happened to see correspondence on her phone, not just discussions about work, but something more. Hugs, secret meetings in cafes, walks at night under the pretext of work. My heart ached, but I decided I couldn't forgive her betrayal. I won't scream and make a scene, no. I would make her life crumble just as mine had crumbled when I found out about the affair. Sally had always been proud of her thesis on Virgil. Virgil, she said, was more than just a poet. He lived in the 1st century BC, and his works, especially the Aeneid, became the foundation of all Western literature. Virgil extolled the ideals of the Roman Empire, glorifying the myths of its origins and exalting the valor and moral values of his heroes. For Sally, the Aeneid was not just an epic poem, but a kind of bridge between the world of antiquity and modernity. In her work, she sought to show how Virgil's ideas could be interpreted in the light of new scientific approaches. But none of that mattered now. She thought it was her ticket into the world of recognized scholars. But what she didn't know was that her dissertation would soon become her nightmare. I got help from my best friend, Anthony. He and I have known each other since high school, and he was always there for me when I needed to sort out problems. Anthony is an IT genius. He knew how to sneak into emails unnoticed, how to access documents, and how to make sure no one guessed. When I told him about Sally cheating on me with Donald, Anthony didn't hesitate long. He proposed a plan: access her email and the cloud where she kept all her dissertation materials. We had to find a way to destroy her work, make it look plagiarized, or make her work look ridiculous. Anthony took up the task with enthusiasm. He knew that Sally used the same password for everything. It was easy, the password was so simple that I almost laughed when Anthony found it, Virgil 88. Funny how her love of Virgil played into her hands. Up to a certain point. Soon Anthony had full access to her email and cloud storage. He found drafts of her work, emails with Donald, discussions of minor edits. We had all of her materials on hand. We could have just handed over some of her work as plagiarized, but Anthony suggested something more interesting. If we want to completely destroy her, we need to do something absurd to make it look like she put that nonsense in herself, Anthony said with a chuckle. I didn't understand what he was talking about at first, but his idea quickly became clear. Anthony suggested inserting outright stupidity into her dissertation. For example, to make her research paper claim that Virgil not only wrote the Aeneid, but also loved double cheeseburgers. Anthony laughed, saying that we could write that Virgil purposely stocked up on lots of cheeseburgers to eat while he composed his great works. That would seem like some outright absurdity, as if Sally had lost her common sense and started including complete nonsense in her work. But Anthony went further. How about we add that Virgil was a frequent visitor to Subway and loved sandwiches, he suggested, clearly enjoying his idea. I couldn't help but laugh. To imagine that Sally's serious academic thesis, which she had spent years preparing, would suddenly include such phrases seemed to me the best way to humiliate her. Anthony had inserted this text at the very end of her paper where she discussed her latest research on Virgil. It was all done in such a way as to make it seem plausible, as if she were writing this absurdity herself. Anthony went on to work on faking Sally's thesis with incredible precision. He inserted some absurd phrases about Virgil that looked so ridiculous that no one would have believed it was serious work. But the key was that it would look as if Sally herself had written it. The last chapter of her dissertation, where she summarized her interpretation of Virgil, now included absurd claims. According to the researcher, Virgil was not only a great poet, but also found inspiration in fast food. He stocked up on double cheeseburgers to eat while composing his works, her thesis now read. Virgil was known for his frequent visits to Subway, where he preferred to order a turkey sandwich, believing it would help his thoughts flow more freely. I couldn't contain my laughter, imagining how the experts reviewing her work would be stunned to read this. No one would believe that Sally was a serious scientist if she left nonsense like this out of her work. But it wasn't just ridiculous, it was devastating. Her career depended on this thesis, and if the examiners found things like this, she would be expelled from academia. It would be the end for her. Anthony and I discussed the details. We need to make it look like her own mistakes, he said. He knew how to make changes to the files so that no one would realize anyone had tampered with them. All of her work was encrypted and only she herself had access to it, at least that's what she thought. But Anthony had changed a few small details, replaced some of the dates the documents were created, tweaked the versions of the files, and it all seemed perfectly natural. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I wanted her reputation not just ruined, I wanted it destroyed completely. Anthony offered to turn over drafts of her work to her own university as proof of plagiarism. We found some obscure sources written years before she started her work and added ideas to her thesis that looked like they had been copied. These sources were so minor and rarely cited that no one would have suspected that she had simply ripped off someone else's thoughts. We made it look like her personal ideas, but when the experts started checking, they would find coincidences. Anthony took care of the technical aspects and I contacted the university anonymously. I sent them a letter claiming that I had evidence that Sally's thesis contained plagiarized material. I attached links to the very articles and research that Anthony and I had used for the forgery. The university had taken it seriously, and now the committee was to review her work. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted Sally to be the last to know, so she wouldn't have time to make excuses or take any steps to protect her reputation. I was waiting for the moment when the accusation became official, and only then was I going to talk to her. Let her learn from others that her thesis was a disgrace. Let her world fall apart just as mine had. I imagined her sitting in front of a committee trying to explain how those ridiculous phrases about cheeseburgers and Subway sandwiches got into her dissertation. How she'll justify that she didn't copy someone else's ideas. But it won't be enough. She'd be expelled, and Donald, that sneaky lover, wouldn't be able to help her. He himself had no influence to save her career. Anthony had finished his work. Now all that was left to do was to wait for the university to finish its inspection. When Anthony finalized the thesis forgery, I felt calmer. We were sure that everything had gone perfectly, and no one would be able to suspect interference. But Anthony was prudent. "We have to back up," he said as soon as he finished editing the files. He knew that the university might require additional checking, or worse, Sally might suddenly discover some changes and try to fix everything. So Anthony suggested looking for a backup copy of her work. Usually such copies are stored in the cloud or on external media, and if she had a backup version, we needed to find it and tamper with it too. He hacked into her cloud storage and found several old versions of her work. We checked them all. It turned out that the last backup was from a week ago, before we made our changes. Anthony had calmly and methodically changed that version too, adding the same absurdity about Virgil, cheeseburgers, and Subway. Now we had ironclad cover. Even if Sally suddenly decided to use the backup, she would find the same erroneous version as in her main work. Evening came. I was sitting in the kitchen when the door opened and Sally came home. She was in a good mood, even more so than usual. She'd been irritable a lot lately, apparently due to nerves at work, but tonight her face was glowing with joy. "You have no idea, Tom, I have my defense in 2 days." She almost shouted with happiness, throwing her bag on a chair. I faked a smile. "That's wonderful, Sally," I said. "Congratulations." She walked over to me, put her arm around my shoulders, and sat down next to me. "Finally. All these years of preparation, studying texts, working with Donald, all for this day. In 2 days it will all be over and I can rest." She was clearly proud of herself. "Yeah, you deserve a vacation," I replied, looking into her eyes. My heart sank a little at the thought of what would happen when the committee found cheeseburgers and plagiarism. But I remained calm, outwardly not giving away my thoughts in any way. Sally continued, "I also remembered one other thing. Remember we talked about buying an apartment and renting it out? It could be a good source of income. Just after the defense, we could look into it. What do you think?" She smiled, clearly pleased that we could start making plans for the future, not knowing that her future was about to be ruined. I looked at her, pretending to ponder, and said, "I guess let's hold off on that for a while. I don't think now is the right time." "Why?" She wondered. "I thought that once the defense passed, we could move on." "It's just not the time," I shrugged. "We need to think things through. There's no rush here." Sally frowned, but apparently decided not to argue. Her thoughts were completely preoccupied with her upcoming thesis defense. She got up from the table and went to take a shower, leaving me alone. I stared after her, knowing that her happy plans would be ruined in an instant when the truth came out. The next day started out quite ordinary. I worked as a clerk in an office, a boring but familiar job. I was inundated with office papers that I had to sort through for the rest of the day. The pile of papers needed sorting, and I tried to concentrate on them, but my thoughts kept coming back to Sally's upcoming defense. At one point, when I was already bogged down in the endless stream of papers, my phone vibrated. A message from Anthony. He wrote briefly but matter-of-factly, "The Institute has responded. They have taken note of our information. Waiting for a response." I could almost hear something click inside. The first stage of revenge had worked. The university had indeed responded to the anonymous letter accusing me of plagiarism. They would not ignore such accusations, especially if it was an academic paper. Now all that was left to do was wait for things to unfold. I went back to my office paperwork, but the tension wouldn't let up. Sally remained in the dark, and I couldn't wait for everything to come crashing down on her. Toward the end of the workday, as the sun was beginning to sink, I looked out the window for a moment. The road in front of the office was busy with cars, and I suddenly realized that I was almost out of my mind because of how much time I had spent on these papers. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Sally. I answered, and almost immediately I heard her irritated voice, "Tom, what the hell happened to my dissertation? What are you talking about?" I asked, even though I already realized where things were going. I sat down at the computer to go over it again before my defense tomorrow, and I found some nonsense. It says cheeseburgers and that Virgil loves Subway. Can you explain how that got into my paper? Her voice shook with anger and panic. I have no idea, I replied, trying to sound completely calm. Maybe you put something in by accident? No way, Tom. I've already fixed it and printed it out. But how did it happen at all? I'm sure such absurdities couldn't have been there. She clearly couldn't handle her emotions, and I knew her confidence was beginning to crumble. But I also knew I was still in control. If you fixed it, then it's okay. Calm down, I said, trying not to provoke her. She sighed, but was clearly still flustered, and ended the conversation by muttering something about still having a lot to do before defense. After Sally hung up, I immediately dialed Anthony. Hey Anthony, it's Tom. Sally's discovered something. She says she's fixed her work, but... Did you keep a copy of that absurd version we made? Of course I did, he answered without delay. I saved everything, and I even have a printed version. If we need to, we can tamper with it until she sees it. I smiled. Everything was going according to plan. Even if Sally had time to fix something, we had a backup. Tomorrow morning we'd switch her final version to the one with the absurdity about Virgil and cheeseburgers. The next morning everything went according to plan. I received from Anthony a copy of that most absurd version of Sally's thesis, where Virgil liked double cheeseburgers and often went to Subway for sandwiches. Despite her attempts to get it right, we were ready for her to get it wrong again. Anthony, as always, had thought it through. Sally, without suspecting anything, got up early in the morning, packed her things, and prepared her dissertation for her defense. Today's the big day, she said, nervously fixing her hair. I pretended to cheer her on, even though inside I already knew this day would be the worst day of her life. Good luck on your defense, I said as I walked her to the door. Sally smiled and walked out, not even realizing that I was already holding another version of her dissertation. As soon as she left, I quickly went up to her office, where a printed, corrected version of her work lay on the desk. I replaced it with the copy Anthony had given me and carefully put it back. Everything had gone smoothly, and now all that was left to do was wait. I got in my car and drove to the office, trying to focus on work, although my thoughts kept returning to what was going to happen in the next few hours. Sally had to face the consequences of her loyalty to Donald and her certainty that I knew nothing of her betrayal. Toward the end of the day, as I was about to leave work, I received a phone call from Sally. I could hear the panic and despair in her voice. Tom. You have no idea what's happened. She screamed into the phone. It's all gone wrong. At my dissertation defense, everyone started laughing at me. I don't understand what happened. I inwardly grinned, but kept my emotions in check. What do you mean? I asked with artificial anxiety in my voice. They found some nonsense in my dissertation. Virgil liked double cheeseburgers and went to Subway? Are you serious? How did that get in my paper? I fixed it, Tom. I fixed it. Her voice was shaking, she was on the verge of hysterics. Sally, I really don't know what you're talking about, I continued calmly. Maybe you missed something yourself. No. I checked everything. But the worst part is that they found something else. Tom, how did my thesis contain screenshots of my correspondence with Donald? There must be some kind of mistake. I don't know how it happened. But now everyone knows about us. I almost laughed out loud. Anthony seemed to have secretly added another touch of revenge by inserting screenshots of her frivolous correspondence with Donald at the end of the dissertation, neatly placed after the list of sources. It was the perfect final blow. Are you kidding me? What other screenshots? I asked, trying to remain serious. Yes. They were at the end, after the reference list. Everyone who was their professors, students saw them. Some laughed, some just said it was a disgrace, and one professor gave me a failing grade right away, without even discussing further corrections. Donald tried to defend me, but in the end he himself was accused of plagiarism and participation in the fraud. Now I've been expelled from the university, Tom. Do you realize what that means? Her voice was now pure rage. Wait, are you saying that Donald has been under attack too? I asked, as if not knowing where this was going. Yes. He was warned that if he made one more mistake, he'd be fired. And I was thrown out, Tom. You don't know what it was like. The university embarrassed me in front of everyone. I listened to her, savoring every word. It worked perfectly. I replied. Sally, I don't know how it happened. Maybe someone interfered? But if you've had correspondence like this, then maybe it really is yours. You're lying. You knew. You're the one who set me up. You found out I was having an affair with Donald and you wanted revenge? Her voice was trembling, but it was fierce. Maybe I did, I answered calmly. Sally tried to say something else, but that's when panic broke out in her office. The guards came over to escort her out. I heard one of the employees tell her that she was no longer authorized to be in the building. The guards escorted her to the exit. I picked up the phone again and dialed Anthony. Hey, Anthony, it's Tom. I want to thank you for the work you've done, especially that unexpected finishing touch with the screenshots. It was brilliant. Glad you liked it, Anthony replied with a slight chuckle. I thought they'd add some pepper to the situation. The university certainly won't forget her now. By the way, did you know they're going to save her dissertation and show it to students as an example of what not to do? It seems like it will become the new teaching material for those who think history and philosophy are boring. I grinned. Are you serious? Absolutely. I think they're going to show it in philosophy lectures as an example of the great failure. I went home after work, knowing that this day would be memorable. When I walked in, Sally was sitting in the living room. She looked calm, even too calm for someone who had just lost everything. Well, Tom, she said with a tired smile. You found out about my affair with Donald and decided to set me up like this? I looked at her calmly and said. Perhaps, yes. But you chose that path yourself. She nodded slowly. In any case, I'm leaving. I'm going to a cousin's house in Alabama. I need time to sort things out. I didn't hold her back. When she left, I was relieved. She left the house and from that moment on I never saw or spoke to her again. A few days later, I received a message from the university. They confirmed that they would keep her dissertation and show it in lectures to the students as an example of how you can ruin your career over stupidity. Sally's work would now become something of an anecdote in the academic community. I told the story to my relatives, first my father, then my brothers. Everyone laughed when they heard that Virgil loved cheeseburgers and went to Subway a lot. It became a real comedy for everyone. I knew I'd made the right choice. I was free now, and Sally had to live with the consequences of her mistakes.